I have good news. Everything's gonna be okay. Wii Games on the Nintendo 3DS. This is an interesting topic because it happened more than once, twice, less than 10, I think. It wasn't a frequent thing, but it was frequent enough to kind of make you think, like, oh my god, I can play Wii Games on this pile of shit. It was very interesting because generally, like when you look at the evolution of Nintendo handhelds and compare it to their home consoles, I mean, you could usually make some comparisons. So something like a Game Boy Advance, that's most similar to a Super Nintendo. And then you move up a generation to the Nintendo DS. Well, what's a generation above the Super Nintendo? The N64. And you saw a couple N64 games on the DS. So it's fair to say, like, okay, well then that's like a N64 on the go. Then we move over to the GameCube and the Nintendo 3DS. And I think, like, it's fair to say, like, the GameCube was probably the closest comparison to the 3DS. Now, of course, all of these are completely different pieces of hardware. The Game Boy Advance, as much as that was a Super Nintendo on the go, like, it still couldn't do a lot of the things a Super Nintendo could do, but the Super Nintendo also couldn't do a lot of the things the Game Boy Advance could. It was always incredibly interesting to me how Nintendo decided to do their hardware like that, where they could have very easily, well, not very easily, but they could have made sure, like, hey, this is gonna be one-to-one with, like, this home console or that home console or whatever. But it just shows to me how much they prioritize making each system kind of their own thing. And they would port games to them just kind of because, like, it made sense. You look at Sony with the PS Vita, oh, this is a PS3 to go, so we gotta put a lot of PS3 games on it. But it wasn't as powerful as a PS3, so, you know, a couple of these games just didn't work out the greatest on that handheld. There's the 3DS, they focused primarily on Nintendo 64 games on this handheld for a bit there, with stuff like Ocarina of Time, Star Fox 64 3D. And what I think is actually really interesting is that the 3DS can technically play like every era of Nintendo. So NES games, SNES games, Game Boy Color, those are all on the Virtual Console on the 3DS, or new 3DS with Super Nintendo. Game Boy Advance is playable on 3DS via like that silly ass little ass ambassador program they had. Nintendo DS, you can just flat out play the cartridges on here. N64, we have remakes, like I said. Then GameCube, barely anything. However, you know, we did get early on in the system's life Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell 3D, which was a remake of a GameCube game. And then we also finally got Luigi's Mansion like super late into the system's life, but it did happen, so we did get GameCube games on here in some form. And then we got a bunch of games, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then after that, we got Wii U games with stuff like Mario Maker, Yoshi's Woolly World. But then beyond that, we got Nintendo Switch games with stuff like Sushi Striker and Fire Emblem Warriors. This thing was truly a jack of all trades. Master of none, though, because how could you call anything that plays this a master? Well, let's start things up with Pilotwings Resort. So, some of the games I'm going to talk about here are technicalities I just kind of want to talk about because it's like, well, this is kind of like a Wii game on the 3DS. At least that's how I viewed it when I was younger. Mainly because when you look at half of the logo here, it is based on Wii Sports Resort, or at least Woohoo Island from Wii Sports Resort. And more specifically, the Island Flyover minigame in Wii Sports Resort. It's pretty much expanded in here as like a full-blown game, in quotes, because it's a bit much to consider this a full-blown game. I was really down for this when it came out. This was a launch title for the 3DS, and not only was it really cool to see like this full-blown like Woohoo Island that looked just right on par with Wii Sports Resort on the go, that was awesome. And it took like the best part of Wii Sports Resort, Island Flyover, like that was the best part, but it's the best mini game in a collection of like 12 mini games. So when you put it on its own, the amount of content they added here just doesn't add up. It still feels like a mini game at the end of the day. Maybe a bit more than that, I'll give it that, but yeah, there's just not enough to really make this game feel like its own thing. It just feels like an excuse to put the Island Flyover game on the 3DS as its own thing and consider it a Pilotwings game. But at the very least, I found this to be a really awesome adaptation of one of my favorite experiences on Wii back then. It does what you want it to do. I will give it that. It is Island Flyover on the 3DS. Good for it. But see, we might want to talk a little more about something like a Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D instead, if you want more of a full-blown experience. I always hated this dumbass logo. Looks like something you'd find on sale on, like, Big Lots or something, I don't know. This was a shocker when it was revealed to me. This got revealed in, like, the Valentine's Day 2013 Nintendo Direct, where they mainly focused on the year of Luigi, and what better way to experience the year of Luigi than to play this game featuring 2 whole monkeys. Donkey Kong Country Returns is, like, one of the best Wii games. It's genuinely phenomenal. And I'm just gonna use this as an excuse to talk about Donkey Kong Country games because, my lord, I love Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, and the games on the Super Nintendo are pretty good too, but I feel like these ones are better. Like they're like these amazing evolutions of what Rare started on the Super Nintendo. But I usually notice like these definitely are harder for a lot of people to get into than obviously something like Mario, because it's Mario. But don't get it twisted. Play the Wii version or the 3DS one and just give it a try. Just give it a chance and don't think of goddamn Mario for like 20 seconds. Try it. You see, a bunch of people consider these games to be balls hard, some of the hardest video games of all time. I would disagree. I think you need to learn Donkey Kong Country. Learn like, okay, what's the general vibe of these level designs? How do these characters feel? And then boom, you're golden. Because I'm able to get through the modern 2D Donkey Kong Country games pretty easily these days. I can definitely tell they're challenging. However, you gotta play them as they're Donkey Kong Country games, not new Super Mario Brothers titles. But the first way I originally played Donkey Kong Country Returns was on the 3DS. You know, in actuality, I think I bought this game on the Wii first. This was when I was first starting to get into game collecting and going to like retro game stores in my area. And I remember going to the one I would always go to. And, you know, every now and then they'd have some pretty rockin' stuff. Listen, let me tell you, Ohio, pretty good when it comes to game stores. We got some good ones around here. Me and my friend Jeff will every now and then kind of go on little Ohio excursions and just kind of be like, you know what? We're just gonna take a road trip today, drive down to like, I don't know, like Cincinnati, and just stop on game stores on the way, check out some record shops, whatever. And we got like a lot of them, whereas I see a lot of other people say how they just don't have a ton of game stores. Well, I do, and the one that I always went to during my teen years, you know, had pretty much all of the major Wii games you would ever ask for on sale at once. I believe the big 3 were Super Mario Galaxy 2, Zelda Twilight Princess, and Donkey Kong Country Returns. And interestingly enough, Twilight Princess not only had the Wii manual in there, but the GameCube one as well, so that was badass. Like, I feel like I could kick anybody's ass after that day. That was pretty awesome. But the game I mainly played after that was Mario Galaxy 2. I might have tried Donkey Kong Country Returns, but I definitely kind of waited until the 3DS game to just kind of sink my teeth into it. And this was just the game that I plowed through on my 3DS for like a month, just kind of chipping away at it. But then later down the line, I played through the game in its entirety on the Wii. And this is a phenomenal version of the game. Like, this is so uncompromised while also being slightly compromised, but still, like, at the end of the day, I feel like the pros and cons of each version make them both completely valid ways to play DKC Returns. The big downside of the 3DS one is that it doesn't look as nice, it doesn't run as nice. It runs at 30 frames per second compared to the Wii version running at 60. So the Wii version is just a smoother, nicer experience, but how nice can it be when I'm having a goddamn aneurysm? Yeah, there's mandatory motion controls in this game, and they stink. They're totally fine, whatever. Like, they don't ruin the experience, and you get used to them like that, you know? Like, it's not a big deal. You have to shake the Wii remote to make Donkey Kong roll or slam on the ground. Like, it works. It's just stupid stupid. And for a game like this that is so focused on precision platforming, it's just the dumb. I hate it. It's so dumb. And like the Wii remote has more than enough buttons for it. You don't need to shake it. I would have loved this game to have classic controller support or GameCube controller support, but it feels like Nintendo never wanted to do that for any game that wasn't like a big multiplayer game or a game that didn't really feel like a whatever, like a big Nintendo first-party game. The Kirby games, don't use it. Mario games, don't use it. But Mario Kart and Smash Brothers do. Xenoblade, because Xenoblade was just like, didn't feel like any of Nintendo's other Wii games. So yeah, sure, why not? That can support the classic controller, but not this one, not the one that needs it. Well, thankfully on the 3DS, Returns 3D obviously doesn't have any motion control. Your slam attack, your roll, all replaced with a simple button press. It's glorious. They also have a 3D effect, which it works really well for this game because so many levels you go into the background and back into the foreground. It feels tailor-made for the effect. It's not necessary whatsoever, but it's definitely a really cool thing that it's on the 3DS because of that fact. We also have a new mode, which was definitely a big feature advertised in this game. Mainly because like it was a huge talking point how difficult Country Returns was. So here there is a new mode that gives you like an extra health point. You can buy some extra items in Cranky Kong's shop to make the game easier. You know, I'm all for that. I think a lot of games like this should have difficulty modes like that like offered right from the get-go, which makes it really strange to me that Tropical Freeze didn't have that from the get-go. You had to wait until the Switch port, which is why I said like it's kind of a tradition with these games. You had to wait till the Switch port for a far more easier way to play the game. But in addition to all that, this version also has just a flat out brand new world with multiple new levels in it. Yeah, I would say overall, this is the one to get. The Wii version looks and feels a lot better, but the controls, I feel, are far more questionable on this one. They aren't bad by any means, but the 3DS one, you know, it's 30 frames per second, but like, that's fine. Obviously, I would prefer it to be 60, but 30 FPS is more than fine for this game, especially the fact that it's a Wii game on the 3DS. And that excuse can only get us so far. Rayman Origins, what a lovely game this was. Originally launched on the Wii, 360, PS3, all that in the holiday season of 2011. And yeah, it was great to have Rayman back as the starring character, because this was the generation where the Rabbids fully took over. I mean, Rayman Raving Rabbids was originally supposed to be Rayman 4, and then that got totally thrown on its head. And ever since then, like, yeah, Rayman was kind of tossed to the side until this game right here, Rayman Origins, brought the series back to 2D platforming, which was only really a part of the first Rayman. I think Rayman was definitely way more well known for his 3D era, starting with Rayman 2. But no, they took Rayman and put him in a completely new 2D game with an amazing art style, phenomenal level design, great control. Playing this game, the levels make you feel like you just kind of want to just hold down that run button and just cruise right through it. And the way Rayman controls, you know, it's a lot more floaty than a new Super Mario Brothers game, but the way it all works makes it so then when you go through these levels, you feel like a goddamn ballerina. Like the way Rayman wall jumps and then glides and kicks in the air, it just all flows in such a unique way. You know, I would say something like a new Super Mario Brothers game, I always preferred how those controlled, but there's something so cool about the modern 2D Rayman games, you know? And that's all on 3DS. For better or for worse, this version got delayed into infinity. I remember, like, it just, like, news articles just kept coming out about, like, nobody knew what was going on with the 3DS version of Rayman Origins. I believe it was announced before, like, all the other versions came out. And then the PS Vita launched, and the game came out as the launch title for that system in early 2012. 3DS version still nowhere to be found. In fact, I think this coming out after the Vita version made this one a hell of a lot worse, because the Vita, you know, it's a very competent handheld. You were able to see all the characters on screen in such clarity. It was so beautiful. And then you go over to the 3DS, and I don't know what the hell I'm even even looking at here? This version of the game is a way to play Rayman Origins if you only have a 3DS, and that's about it. It is just a blurry mess on this screen because it's basically a straight port of the game on, Wii, 360, PS3. And the Wii version was already a bit too blurry because, this game was made for HD consoles with its gorgeous 2D art. And because of that, it zooms out pretty far, so characters are very tiny on screen. Doesn't work on a handheld with the screen the size of a small mouse. Mice are already small, man. It plays fine. You don't have multiplayer anymore, which, that's unfortunate, but, were you really expecting that here? The 3DS was finally at the point where you could get, like, the same game as what was releasing on 360, PS3, Wii, all of that. When a game like this, let's say Rayman Origins came out on those platforms, and then this version released for the DS, yeah, you would expect a different kind of game, like it might have had the same level designs or whatever, but they would have kind of rebuilt the game to work on the DS. The 3DS got up to that power level where it just made more sense to port it, but at the same time, it doesn't make that much sense because the game just doesn't work as well this way. That just kind of shows like handheld systems growing in power is kind of a double-edged sword, you grow in power, that's great. But when it comes to multi-plats like this, you're gonna go for the lazy port instead of crafting a brand new version of the game, But, it's whatever. It's still a good game, This is still a great game on 3DS. It's just the worst way to play a great game, and it genuinely has, like, no point at this point. Like, there's no reason to play it on here at this point. God, I'm being an asshole, aren't I? And does this even count? Yeah, this is definitely just a case of like, yeah, they share the same title and they're kind of labeled as multi-platform games, but they're not the same. But even though they have like a lot of the same vibes. Yeah, Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games. This actually released a couple months later after this game. The Mario and Sonic release schedule is all sorts of so the original one, the Wii version, released first, and then the DS one came out a couple months later. Olympic Winter Games launched day and date on Wii and DS. Then this one, the 3DS one, came out a couple months after the Wii one. Then Winter Sochi 2014 on Wii U. That's it, just on Wii U, no 3DS version at all. And then Rio 2016, the 3DS version launched first, and then the Wii U version came out after. I don't understand the pattern here. And yeah, I gotta be honest, most of the Mario and Sonic games definitely blend in for me. This is not the same game as that. It's more of a 3DS adaptation of the general aura of this game, but they both kind of accomplish the same thing outside of, Mario and Sonic just doesn't work as well on a 3DS or a handheld for that matter. The handheld games, like, have consistently been fine, much like how the Wii games have consistently been fine until they got dog-ass bad on Wii U. But this is pretty much a classic case of multi-platform game where the 3DS version is pretty much entirely different from the Wii one. But it's mostly in the form of like, yeah, you're playing in different ways. But when I say they're completely different games, they're not completely different. They're just kind of like different timeline versions of Mario and Sonic at London 2012. Like you can see right here, over 50 exhilarating events, only 30. But this one does a dumbass thing where like, okay, you have all these playable characters, but not all of them are playable in every event. Like characters are in groups of 4 in terms of like, which events they're in. Like Mario and Sonic and Luigi and Tails, well, they're all playable in these events. But then Peach and Amy and Daisy and Blaze, well, they're all playable in these events. It's very strange. I think maybe the reasoning for that is just so then they didn't have to create, like, animations for every single character for every single event. So, like, maybe that's the case because they did that multiple times. They did that in the Rio game as well on 3DS. So, I don't know. But either way, yep, check that one off the list. But don't put that list away because we're about to just rip into this one right here. Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. What a dumbass title. So this was the last game Nintendo ever published on the 3DS, and there was some funny little build up to this one. I remember this was thought of to be a new 3DS exclusive for a bit there, like Nintendo's website labeled it as such, which was silly. And it was announced at a time where like 3DS tolerance was at an all-time low. This was like in fall of 2018. This was like the big September 2018 direct. This was when like Luigi's Mansion 3 was unveiled and Smash Brothers was still building up. Some exciting stuff, but as a Nintendo Switch owner, 2018 kind of felt like the lower end year. After the craziness of 2017, we got Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, and such incredible announcements like Metroid Prime 4 was coming out, and then moving into 2018, where we start off the year with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate being announced. Outside of that, though, it was a lot of Wii U ports and a lot of half-baked titles, stuff like Mario Tennis Aces. At the time when that released, it was like, woo-wee, stink-y. And then Super Mario Party, that just didn't have enough content at all, and the game board designs were really lame. They were both steps in the right directions. Mario Tennis Aces had good gameplay. Super Mario Party had a great format to it, and also, looked amazing, sounded great, but, Kirby Star Allies, anyone? And outside of that, it just kind of felt like Nintendo was repeating 2014 on the Wii U. Bayonetta 2 launched earlier that year, which was a 2014 Wii U game. And then we got Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which was a 2014 Wii U game. Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, again. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, once again, 2014. And then Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which was heavily based on Smash Bros. Wii U. Obviously, it was a new game, but it was still built off of Smash Wii U, which was also a 2014 game. So, pretty interesting year overall. So for just some variety, for God's sake, I would have taken a port of 2010's Kirby's Epic Yarn. Nah, it came to the 3DS. It's not a horrible idea though. Kirby's Epic Yarn is a gorgeous game with its, felt and yarn aesthetic. However, it's not really like pushing graphical boundaries from a technical perspective, more so from like an art design perspective. So it seems like it would have been a fairly simple job taking this game and just putting it on 3DS. So that's what they did at a time where 3DS support was pretty much simply very low effort stuff. Remakes, ports, re-releases, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's pretty smart, that's the same thing we experienced with the Nintendo Switch in 2023 and 2024 as that system was winding down, which, yeah, like a lot of your system's library is old stuff, but at the same time, it's either that or absolutely nothing, which is what the Wii got and basically what the Wii U got. The last years in those systems' lives were miserable. So yeah, to kind of maintain momentum, get some fan service out there, give the fans some games that they really like, that'll be like some solid content on store shelves, all of that made sense what they did with the 3DS. Of course, that also meant Kirby got a ton of junk on this handheld in like the last few years of its life. We had Planet Robobot a year before the Switch released in 2016, then Battle Royale in 2018, and then this one a year later in 2019. And here's the thing. This is still Kirby's Epic Yarn. It's good, but this is not a great way to play the game. It's still all there, and you can definitely enjoy it this way. But it's definitely a pretty like messy port when it comes to like game design and all of that. Like, it's not a messy port in terms of functioning. It functions great. But Nintendo has a very specific quota they like to meet with a lot of these re-releases. They like to focus on like, oh, look what's new. They always have to introduce like a new character or a new mode or whatever. And I'm just kind of like, listen, like I appreciate it, but at the same time, like, man, you ruin some of these re-releases that way, especially here. Devilish mode and Ravel abilities. So Ravel abilities are pretty much like adding copy abilities to Kirby's Epic Yarn, which, those weren't really here. Kirby still transformed, which I think is something Nintendo was trying to push when Epic Yarn was introduced, you know, like he wasn't sucking enemies in. And, you know, at the end of the day, Kirby's Epic Yarn wasn't originally meant to be a Kirby game. It was supposed to be an original IP, but then they kind of put Kirby in it. And I think it still feels like a Kirby enough game, but yeah, that doesn't super have what makes Kirby Kirby to many. But you know, he's still transformed into a saucer and a dolphin. And when he dash, he turns into a car. You know, well, Kirby's still Kirby at the end of the day. Like, yeah, keep telling yourself that. Ravel abilities pretty much brings more traditional transformations, I guess, into Epic Yarn, which is cool. But it's like the game wasn't designed around them, so it's just like it doesn't matter. It's like if in Mario 1 you re-release Super Mario Brothers, the original, but then you advertise, oh my god, the cape from Super Mario World is in this game, and it's just like, oh my god, that's awesome, I love the cape. But then, you know, you use the cape in Mario 1, and like none of the levels are designed around this thing, and it just breaks the game pretty much. You can just fly through the entire level, and at the same time, there's nothing like above the general level design that you're gonna see with the cape by flying. So it's just like, what's the point of this? Cool, this is here, that's kind of fun. But it's just, it's not designed around that. And that's what the Ravel abilities feel like in Epic Yarn. But we have Devilish mode. It's annoying. It's a half-assed attempt at a difficult mode in Kirby's Epic Yarn. But it's pretty much just that this fucking devil comes in and just annoys you. It just annoys you. That's all he does. And I'm like, just add a life system or something. Why couldn't you do that? You know, there's some new mini games, which is kind of cool. You know, Kirby's Epic Yarn didn't originally have mini games, and you know, that's another kind of staple of the Kirby franchise to have the sub games. So you know, that's cool that those are there, and especially that they're starring King Dedede and Meta Knight. But you know, like I said, you know, going off of the Ravel abilities, the fact that the game wasn't really designed around that, and how this port just doesn't really work as well from a game design perspective. One of the most baffling things about this game is how they ported over the sections of the game where you had to point the Wii remote at the screen and draw like a track for Kirby as a train to go on. You would think the best way to do that on 3DS is just use the touchscreen to draw that. No, you use a cursor with the circle pad. Why? I assume it's because like they didn't care. You know, I assume touchscreen support would have been harder to incorporate into the game. So it's just like they just did a thing where you move a cursor around with the circle pad. Why? It's just dumb. I mean, like, this is a fine version of the game. You're getting the Kirby's Epic Yarn experience, and it's a great game. You know, Epic Yarn is a very cozy, comfortable experience. I do like it. However, it is not the best version of the game, and I would just recommend the original Wii one. Oh, and they also gutted the two-player co-op from the Wii version. That's no longer here. Do you know somebody that want to play this with you? I'd say it all comes down to the most impressive Wii to 3DS port here, and that's Xenoblade Chronicles 3D on the new 3DS. What a technical marvel. If you've ever seen Xenoblade Chronicles, like, this is probably the most like graphically intensive Wii game out there, or at least like scope wise, it's the most graphically intensive. It's this giant open world RPG, and you're just gonna take that and put it on the 3DS. At the very least, new 3DS. So they couldn't do this on the regular one, but the new 3DS is like, come on, like, seriously? You were able to make this work, but like, why didn't you do other Wii games at that point? You know what's really weird is the fact that this port was developed by Monster Games, and you might know them as the developer of Excitebots. But also, they were the ones that ported Donkey Kong Country Returns to the 3DS. So pretty strange that they ended up becoming the Wii to 3DS port studio, at least for 2 games here. And the fact they went from Donkey Kong Country Returns, which, you know, I didn't really look at that and go like, how could they have possibly made that work on 3DS? I'm looking at this and going, how could they have possibly made this work on 3DS? Xenoblade 3D did a fair amount of things here. One, it made Xenoblade 1 far more accessible / relevant, I guess. I mean, the original Wii version just kind of, I mean, it had a pretty low print run overall, exclusive to GameStop here in North America. I mean, people had to fight to get this game over here in the States. It was low print run. GameStop kind of controlled it there. And by the time 3D came out, used copies were going for like $80, $90. So, re-releasing it on a handheld for like $40. Now it's a new release, it's available everywhere, and you have advertisements going out for it. People would rather play a new release rather than an old-ass game, even if the new release is of an old-ass game. So, that kind of helps Xenoblade out that way. But in addition, it showed what the new 3DS could do. It gave the new 3DS not only an exclusive game incentive to get the new version of the handheld, but it also showed, hey, we can get like the biggest Wii game imaginable running on this thing. And it works. I would not say this should be your default way of experiencing Xenoblade Chronicles. It runs fine, it works great, all of that, but it's like, at this point, obviously we have Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on Nintendo Switch. That is truly the definitive edition of the game. It's actually running in a state where it feels like it has some leg room, It doesn't feel like it's constantly about to blow up on the system you're running it on. And that's the thing. The original Wii version, as good as this game was, the game looked just ugly. Not art design wise, but graphically. It's just like all the faces were just so blurry and just like it just didn't belong on the original Wii. And you take that and you make it worse. You already take the game that deserved a remake, but an HD remake, and you give it a 3DS downgrade. Very impressive this runs. Very cool, and it works great on the 3DS. But when I say works great on the 3DS, I wouldn't say it works great on the whole. It's something where this is an amazing novelty at this point. Back in 2015, when this originally released, it was incredible. It was something that was like, wow, a better way to play Xenoblade for, a more affordable price, on the go. All of that was super cool. Don't play this. And yeah, those are kind of all the Wii games on 3DS of note. There's a fair amount of other ones. There is Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, which released on 3DS and Wii U, which is an updated version of Monster Hunter Tri on Wii. You also had the Bit Trip games. Bit Trip Saga released on 3DS. And then you have some funky ones where you could kind of consider it that. Mario Party the Top 100, WarioWare Gold, and Rhythm Heaven Mega Mix were kind of this interesting thing Nintendo was doing for a bit there, near the end of the 3DS life, where they were creating new games, but these new games would incorporate old, like, mini games or old levels, whatever, from past entries, including some new ones, aside from Mario Party the Top 100. I just want to mention Mario Party the Top 100, f that game. But like WarioWare Gold was like a new game with reused like innards, I guess, or like all the micro games, most of the micro games were from previous WarioWares. Same goes with Rhythm Heaven Mega Mix. Most of the rhythm games in that were taken from previous games with some new ones thrown in there. And of course, many of the games were from the Wii entries in these series. And then of course, we also have like some more indie games. I already mentioned Bit Trip, but of course there was Cave Story, there was Retro City Rampage. There was a fair amount of stuff from the Wii you could play on 3DS. Not a ton, but enough to be like a kind of a cool subset of 3DS releases here. But for the most part, many of these games kind of felt like they were just done because they could do it, rather than it was like, oh yeah, this is like the perfect idea. But I will never say it's not interesting. And whenever I'd see a Wii game come to 3DS, at least in those early years, with stuff like Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D, Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, it was exciting. It was really cool to see these games that were only home console games up until that point playable on the 3DS, which I still find more like impressive than like if like a home console game is playable on like the Nintendo Switch or something. Like 3DS games have their own funk to them. They look like 3DS games. They have that chunkiness, that resolution, all of that is just like, oh yeah, that's a 3DS game. Switch doesn't have that. So when you're actually playing like something like BioShock Infinite or the Batman Arkham games or whatever on the Switch for the first time, it's definitely cool. It's definitely like, wow, I'm finally playing this home console game on the go. That's a great experience. But the 3DS gave you like that experience, but with a little 3DS twist. You know, it felt like a lot more than just a flat port. It felt like a port, but with some character to it. Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn on the 3DS doesn't look entirely like Kirby's Epic Yarn, and that's interesting, man. So because of that, I have a request, Nintendo. May your next system have dog shit specs, because I would love to play the original Luigi's Mansion and have it look like just weird as